Donald Trump has just barred Canada, not a tariff, not a warning, an outright ban. A sitting American president opened Truth Social at 9:03 in the morning and published a 47-word message declaring a total suspension of all non-essential trade and travel between the United States and its largest trading partner. $2 billion in commerce every day, 9 million American jobs directly or indirectly supported, 70 years of deeply integrated economic architecture built through two world wars, the Cold War, a global pandemic, and every major crisis in between, wiped away in a tweet with a 72-hour deadline attached. Mark Carney happened to be standing at a live podium when it occurred. A journalist read the tweet out loud inside the room. And what Carney did in the following 60 seconds, on camera, across every major international broadcast feed simultaneously, in front of Canada's press corps and the global media, created a moment so constitutionally precise, so strategically damaging, and so immediately consequential that within 40 minutes the dollar had weakened, gold had climbed, 3 G7 finance ministers had called Ottawa, and a Republican Senate committee chairman publicly questioned whether the President of the United States even possessed the legal authority to do what he had just declared. What is unfolding right now is not a normal trade dispute. It is not a negotiation tactic. It is a live constitutional crisis playing out in public view on international television in real time, with consequences spreading into every allied capital, every financial market, and every corner of the rules-based international order that the United States spent 70 years constructing and is now, in the span of a single social media post, actively dismantling. When the prime minister of a G7 country calmly explains on live television that a presidential tweet carries no legal standing under domestic law, international treaty law, or World Trade Organization rules, and financial markets confirm that interpretation within 20 minutes, the credibility structure of American executive authority has entered territory it has never occupied before. Hit that subscribe button right now because this is the story defining what happens next, and you will not want to miss the coverage. So, what exactly triggered this moment on March 25th, 2026 at 9:03 a.m., 3 Eastern Time? Donald Trump posted on Truth Social. The full message read, "Canada has been ripping off the United States for years. Enough. I am hereby announcing a complete ban on all non-essential trade and travel between the United States and Canada, effective in 72 hours unless Canada signs our framework agreement immediately. No more games. America first." 47 words, no statute cited, no emergency declaration filed, no consultation with the Office of the United States Trade Representative, no briefing of the Senate Finance Committee or the House Ways and Means Committee, the two congressional bodies whose constitutional authority over trade is explicit and unambiguous. No formal diplomatic communication was transmitted to the Canadian Embassy in Washington or to the Canadian High Commission. Just a social media post carrying exactly the same legal infrastructure as a weekend golf update, yet claiming to suspend the largest bilateral trading relationship in human history. A relationship that has never been interrupted. Not by World War II, not by the Korean War, not by Vietnam, not by September 11th, not by the 2008 financial crisis, and not even by a global pandemic that killed millions. None of those events halted U.S.-Canada trade for a single day. Yet a tweet posted at 9:03 on a Tuesday morning was apparently supposed to accomplish what none of them could. This is not simply another political controversy. Canada supplies roughly 60% of American crude oil imports. Canada heats millions of homes across the American Northeast and Midwest through natural gas exports. Canada powers New York, Vermont, Maine, and Minnesota with hydroelectric electricity delivered through long-term contracts. Canada is also the single largest export market for American goods of any country on Earth. The framework agreement the tweet demanded Canada sign, described by sources familiar with its content, would require Canada to surrender independent monetary policy, adopt American regulatory standards across 14 major industries, and withdraw every pending USMCA dispute panel challenge. That was not a negotiation position. It was effectively a demand for capitulation disguised in the language of commerce. And when a prime minister hears a demand like that read aloud on live international television and responds the way Mark Carney responded, you know immediately that what follows will not be what the person who sent the tweet expected. Here is the broader context that had been building toward this moment. The escalation from tariffs toward a full trade ban had been accelerating for weeks. It was driven by Canada's sovereign energy declaration, the rejected wheat demand, the auto tariff confrontation, the surprise agricultural technology partnership announcement, and a series of USMCA dispute filings that together constructed a legal record of American treaty violations so comprehensive that Ottawa's Trade Council internally described it as the most thoroughly documented case of executive branch treaty breach in the agreement's history. But the immediate trigger arrived on March 22nd, 2026, when Canada's USMCA challenge to American auto tariffs was accepted for expedited review by the Dispute Panel Secretariat, a procedural development the White House counsel's office apparently did not anticipate. The United States was now formally a respondent in an international legal proceeding operating on its own timeline, governed by its own rules, and completely outside the reach of executive orders or social media declarations. According to reporting from the Washington Post and the Financial Times, the panel acceptance reached the White House counsel's office on the morning of March 22nd and produced an internal reaction sources described as incandescent. 3 days later, the tweet appeared. Multiple sources familiar with the internal sequence said the ban announcement was not a calculated strategic escalation, but rather a reactive impulse. The response of an administration that had exhausted its available policy tools without producing compliance and then reached for the largest blunt instrument available, believing the sheer scale of the threat would substitute for the coherence of a legal strategy. They were wrong. And what happened when that assumption collided with Mark Carney standing at a live podium is the entire story. Smash that like button right now, because what I'm about to walk you through will completely reframe how you understand where this confrontation actually stands. Here is where the situation became truly serious. At 9:03 a.m. on March 25th, the tweet was posted. Mark Carney was halfway through a live press conference on Canadian housing policy at the National Press Theatre in Ottawa. CBC, CTV, Global News, BBC World, CNN International, and Reuters were all broadcasting the event live. Laura Stone from the Globe and Mail received the alert on her phone, raised her hand, and read the tweet aloud to the room. The room fell silent. Every camera was already broadcasting live. There was no pause. No aide stepping forward to whisper instructions, no commercial break, just a prime minister standing behind a podium on international television who had 4 seconds to decide how to respond to being told, in a tweet, that his country had been banned. He did not look down at notes. He did not request a copy of the message. He took one visible breath and began speaking. "I've seen it," Carney said. His voice carried the calm tone developed by central bank governors who spend years managing financial crises in public. The tone that signals to markets and governments alike that the situation is understood, the response is considered, and panic is not part of the equation. Let me respond directly. Every camera in the room zoomed in. "A tweet is not a law," Carney said. "A social media post does not constitute a legal instrument under American domestic law, international treaty law, or the rules of the World Trade Organization. Canada will not respond to a tweet. Canada will respond to whatever formal legal instrument the United States chooses to transmit through proper diplomatic channels. If one exists. If none exists, there is nothing to respond to." A second journalist immediately raised her hand. "Prime Minister, are you saying Canada is simply ignoring the President of the United States?" Carney turned toward her without hesitation. I am saying, he replied, that Canada applies the same standard to American communications that we apply to all sovereign communications. If it is a formal instrument with legal standing, we respond formally. If it is a social media post without legal standing, we acknowledge it and continue governing. Today, Canada continues governing. What happened in the 40 minutes after that exchange was, according to financial analysts and diplomatic observers tracking the broadcast, genuinely without precedent in modern allied government relations. The dollar weakened 1.3% against a basket of major currencies within 20 minutes of the clip reaching financial news terminals. Gold rose. Treasury yields shifted. Markets were not reacting simply to Canada's words. They were reacting to the precise combination of two simultaneous signals: a presidential communication that markets recognized as legally incoherent, and a prime ministerial response that markets recognized as legally grounded. When those signals appear together on the same live broadcast, professional traders do not wait for commentary. They price the gap immediately. Three G7 finance ministers from Germany, France, and Japan called Ottawa within 40 minutes. Diplomatic sources said all three conveyed essentially the same message. Canada held the legal high ground, the international community was watching closely, and the procedural path Canada had pursued through USMCA dispute mechanisms was the correct one. The British Foreign Secretary issued a public statement within the hour describing the tweet as deeply concerning and reaffirming Britain's commitment to the rules-based international trading system. The European Union's Trade Commissioner organized an emergency coordination call with counterparts from Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand before noon. These were not adversaries organizing against America. These were American allies coordinating responses to an American executive action before lunchtime on the day it was announced. And legally speaking, a presidential social media post has no effect whatsoever. That is not a political opinion. It is a constitutional fact. A tweet is not an executive order. It is not a presidential proclamation. It is not a national emergency declaration. It is not a formal diplomatic communication. Under American law, trade restrictions of the scale Trump described require either formal presidential action citing specific statutory authority or an act of Congress. The statutory authorities available to presidents for trade action each include procedural requirements that limit both the speed and scope of executive power. And there was no clear statutory path for what that tweet claimed to do. What existed instead was a 72-hour clock ticking toward a deadline while the White House counsel's office scrambled to construct a legal instrument capable of supporting the announcement that had already been made, and that is where the story stands.